Everyone said grief brings families together. They were wrong. My husband's funeral brought out secrets I was never meant to see, and the moment I turned that safe's handle, everything I knew about his brother shattered. People talk about death as if it ends things. But sometimes, it only uncovers them. My name is Evelyn Carter. And this is the story of how I buried one man I loved, and exposed another who thought he could bury the truth with him. So settle in. Because this isn't just about loss. It's about what happens when a widow learns that grief can be a weapon, and she's not afraid to use it. The funeral of masks. The rain came down in thin, relentless lines, the kind that soaked through black umbrellas and whispered condolences. Everywhere I turned, I saw pity, neighbors, old colleagues, even strangers from the church who claimed to know David. But not him. Not Mark Carter. He walked through the crowd like the weather couldn't touch him, expensive suit, polished shoes, and a smile far too bright for a man standing over his brother's grave. When his eyes met mine, something twisted in my stomach. He spread his arms as though the cemetery were his stage. "Evie," he said warmly, pulling me into a one-armed hug that smelled faintly of cologne and money. "You don't have to worry about a thing. I'll handle everything from here." Everything. The word rang like a bell in my head. I stepped back and forced a polite smile, but the air between us felt wrong, too light, too easy, as though he'd been waiting for this moment. Mark had always been the charming one. The kind of man who told stories so big you forgot to ask if they were true. He had an answer for everything, a joke for every silence, and a grin that promised more than it delivered. David used to say, "My brother could sell the sand back to the desert." I used to laugh. But standing there in the drizzle, watching Mark shake hands and collect condolences like currency, I didn't feel like laughing. When the service ended and the crowd thinned, Mark lingered near the grave. He placed a single white rose on the coffin, bowed his head, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then, when he turned toward me, for just a second, his smile dropped. Cold. Calculated. Gone before anyone else noticed. That's when I knew, this wasn't over. 2 days later, I stood in David's study, surrounded by his quiet chaos. Stacks of papers, the smell of cedar and ink, and the faint trace of his cologne clinging to the air, it felt like walking through a ghost. I'd been avoiding this room since the funeral. Every drawer held a piece of him, and I wasn't ready to break him into memories. But grief has its own gravity. Eventually, it pulls you toward what you fear most. I started with his desk, the one with the tiny chip in the corner from the day we'd tried to move it ourselves. Bills, letters, half-finished notes. Nothing unusual, until I found the envelope. It was tucked behind a framed photo of us at the lake house. The handwriting stopped me cold. For Evelyn, if something happens to me. My hand shook as I opened it. Evie. If Mark shows up after I'm gone, do not trust him. There's a safe under the floorboard in my study. The code is your birthday. You'll know what to do when you see what's inside. The room tilted. I reread the note twice, my pulse roaring in my ears. David knew something. Something he couldn't tell me while he was alive. I dropped to my knees, pulling the rug back until my fingers found the edge of the floorboard. It lifted with a soft creak. Beneath it, a square of cold steel gleamed in the lamplight, a small safe, hidden deep within the wood. I entered my birthday. Click. The lock turned with a sigh. Inside were 3 things. A black ledger. A sealed envelope. And a small velvet pouch. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a deed, the title to our home, signed solely in my name, dated just 2 weeks before he died. My eyes stung. He'd made sure I'd be safe. Then I opened the ledger. Rows of numbers. Names. Dates. And one name at the top of every page, Mark Carter. Bank transfers. Shell companies. Withdrawals from David's business accounts, tens of thousands of dollars at a time. Each entry written in David's steady hand. At the bottom of the final page was a note. He thinks I don't know. But I've kept records. If you're reading this, Evie, protect what's ours. A sound escaped me, half sob, half laugh. Mark had been stealing from his brother. And David had known all along. I sat there on the floor for a long time, staring at the ledger as if it might explain why. Then headlights flashed outside the window. A car door slammed. Then, the doorbell. The bell rang again. 3 sharp chimes that made my heart skip. Through the window, headlights cut across the rain. A sleek black car. Mark. I shoved the ledger under the throw blanket on the sofa and forced myself to breathe. When I opened the door, he was there, grinning, dripping water on the porch. Evie, he said, as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. Couldn't let you spend another night alone. Thought I'd bring dinner. A glass dish of lasagna steamed between his hands. I thanked him, motioning him in, watching the water bead on his jacket sleeve. He scanned the room, subtle, like a man checking the scene before a deal. You holding up? He asked. I'm managing. He nodded, then glanced toward David's study. He kept everything in there, didn't he? Files, records, maybe even passwords? I felt the question slide beneath the small talk like a knife under silk. Why? I asked. He shrugged. Just trying to help with the estate, you know. Thought maybe there's a safe or something we should look into. David always was the careful type. The word safe hit like thunder. I smiled faintly. If there is one, I haven't seen it. He studied me. For a second, the grin faltered. Then he reached for his fork, all charm again. Well, if anything turns up, call me. We'll handle it together. That night, after he left, I locked every door. And for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't crying. I was planning. Morning light spilled across David's desk as I copied every page of the ledger. Photocopies in one folder, the original locked in a box beneath my bed. By noon I was sitting across from Mr. Howard, David's longtime attorney. He adjusted his glasses and read in silence. The ticking of the wall clock filled the office. When he looked up, his face was pale. Mrs. Carter, these are embezzlement records. Your brother-in-law transferred hundreds of thousands from your husband's business over the years. My hands trembled. Can we prove it? We can, he said slowly, if we let him prove it himself. He outlined a plan, a recorded conversation, a witnessed admission, and a controlled confrontation that would make the authorities' job easy. All I had to do was play the widow he thought I was. Before leaving, I asked, did David know? Mr. Howard hesitated. He suspected. He started protecting assets months before he passed. That's why the house is solely in your name. I left the office with the faintest flicker of warmth in my chest. David had trusted me to finish what he couldn't. 2 nights later, I called Mark. Mark. I found something, I whispered into the phone. Silence. Then his voice softened fast. You did? What is it? I'm not sure. There's paperwork. I think it's about the company. I'll be right there. 20 minutes later, his car screeched into the driveway. I'd set the stage exactly as Mr. Howard instructed, the safe open, papers scattered, my phone recording from inside the drawer. Mark stepped in, eyes darting to the safe like a moth to flame. Evie, you shouldn't have opened that, he said carefully. Those are business documents, confidential stuff. Then why is your name on every transfer? I asked. His jaw tightened. It's complicated. David owed me money. We had an arrangement. An arrangement that involved offshore accounts? I tilted my head. His breath hitched. Where did you look? None of this matters now. David's gone. The company's mine to run. You can relax. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of. The same words he'd used at the funeral. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You stole from him. He scoffed. You think you can prove that? Those notes won't hold up. And if you push this, you'll lose everything he left you. For a heartbeat, the house was silent except for the rain. Then I smiled, small, deliberate. Then I guess it's a good thing you just admitted it. His eyes widened as the faint red light of my phone reflected off the drawer. Evie, what did you do? I did what David asked me to, I said. I protected what's ours. He lunged for the drawer, but I was faster. The phone slid into my pocket. Get out, I said quietly. He froze, fury and fear warring behind his eyes, then stormed out into the rain. I locked the door and leaned against it, shaking, but not from fear. From relief. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't the grieving widow. I was the storm coming for him. I stood there, my fingers brushing over the dusty metal of the safe, my pulse thrumming like a war drum in my ears. The room felt colder now. Even the sunlight filtering through the curtains seemed reluctant to touch what I was about to uncover. I turned the dial one final time, hearing that satisfying click. Slowly, I pulled the heavy door open. Inside were folders, thick ones. Some labeled neatly in my husband's handwriting, Business, 2012. Loans, 2015. Personal. But one stood out, a red folder, slightly torn at the corner, with no label. Something about it felt wrong. I reached for it with trembling fingers, laid it flat on the desk, and opened it. What stared back at me didn't make sense, not at first. Pages and pages of transactions, check stubs, and signed statements, all bearing my husband's name. But the recipient's name repeated across them, Robert Whitmore. My husband's brother. The man who stood at the funeral with a sympathetic smile, patting my shoulder, whispering, "You're not alone, Evelyn." He had been siphoning money for years. Hundreds of thousands, quietly moved, disguised as investments and consulting fees. And every single page was signed. But not by my husband. The signature, though almost perfect, had one small flaw. I knew his handwriting better than anyone. He had a very particular way of curling the T in Turner. This one? It was forced. Sloppy. Fake. I sank into the chair. The truth hit me like a brick wall. Robert had been forging my husband's signature. My husband had trusted him with access to some accounts, but he'd never known this. I stared at the papers for what felt like hours, fury and grief mixing into something sharp. The man who had just buried his brother was the same man who'd been robbing him blind. And now, that same man had shown up smiling at my door, offering to help with the estate. The next morning, I called him. My voice calm. Controlled. "Robert," I said, "I need you to come by. There's something you should see." He arrived within the hour, polished as ever, in a tailored suit and that same gentle smile. "Evelyn," he greeted me, "you look tired. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I replied, motioning him toward the study. "There's something in the safe you might remember." He stiffened, just for a second. But I saw it. That flicker of unease behind his eyes. As he stepped inside, I pulled the red folder from the desk drawer and slid it toward him. "Do you know what this is?" He glanced down, and for a heartbeat, his face went pale. Where did you find this?" "In the safe," I said evenly. "Where my husband left it." "I thought you might want to explain why your name appears on every single document." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evelyn, you must be mistaken. Those are legitimate transfers. Your husband and I had arrangements." "Arrangements?" I tilted my head. "Funny. Because his lawyer didn't know about them. And neither did I, his wife of 32 years. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Evelyn, you don't understand business." He trusted me. "Those funds were." "Don't." My tone cut through the air like a blade. "Don't you dare lie to me in his house." He froze. I took a slow breath, then said softly, "You forged his signature, Robert." You used his illness, his trust, to steal from him. For the first time, the mask slipped. His mouth twitched, and his eyes hardened. You think anyone's going to believe you? You're grieving. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think they will, I said, opening my phone. Because I've already sent copies of these files to his lawyer, and to the board of your company. His eyes widened. You, what? Sit down, Robert. He didn't move. But the power shifted instantly. For the first time, he wasn't in control. I was. He left soon after, his face drained of color, muttering that this was all a misunderstanding. I let him go. But I wasn't finished. I called my husband's attorney that evening, a kind man named Richard, who had been with us since our wedding. He confirmed my suspicion. My husband had been planning to rewrite his will before he fell ill, to separate his assets from Robert's reach. But he'd never had the chance. Evelyn, Richard said carefully, what you have there, it's serious. Fraud. Embezzlement. We can take this public, but once we do, it won't be quiet. I thought for a long moment. My husband had always been private, a man who believed in dignity over spectacle. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about truth. Do it, I said finally. File the case. Every document, every forged signature, I want the truth out. And we did. Within days, whispers started spreading across town. Robert's company's accounts were frozen. His business partners began asking questions. And the same friends who once adored him now avoided his calls. He tried reaching me again, through calls, letters, even showing up at the gate one night, begging for a conversation. But I didn't answer. He had taken enough of my peace. Weeks later, the court hearing began. I sat in the front row, my hands folded tightly, as the evidence unfolded piece by piece. The forged documents. The transfers. The handwriting analysis. Robert sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, calm, deliberate. The courtroom fell silent. My husband trusted his brother, I began softly. He believed family meant loyalty. But some people mistake love for weakness. They think kindness is an open door. What Robert did wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. Repeated, deliberate, cruel. Robert's gaze darted toward me, but I didn't flinch. I'm not here for revenge, I continued. I'm here for truth. My husband deserved dignity, even in death. When I finished, there was silence. Then the judge nodded slowly. By the end of that week, the verdict came in, guilty. Robert was sentenced to prison, his company assets seized, his reputation ruined. Months passed. Life became quiet again, peaceful in a way that felt both foreign and healing. I spent my mornings tending the garden my husband loved so much. One day, a letter arrived. No return address. But I knew the handwriting immediately. It was from Robert. Inside, a single page. Evelyn. You were right. I told myself it was business, but it was greed. I hated that your husband loved you more than anyone else. I wanted to have what he had, his success, his peace, his family. Now I have nothing. And maybe that's fair. Don't waste your heart on anger anymore. I folded the letter quietly and placed it in the fire. Because forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. It was something I gave myself. That spring, I took the settlement money, not for luxury, not for revenge. I rebuilt my husband's charity foundation. The same one Robert had tried to dismantle years ago. We renamed it the Turner Trust. Every scholarship, every grant, bore my husband's name, not as a memory of loss, but as a legacy of integrity. At the launch event, as I stood before the crowd, I felt something inside me settle. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a widow surrounded by ghosts. I felt like a guardian of his truth, his memory, and our shared life. After the event, a young woman approached me, one of the scholarship recipients. "Mrs. Turner," she said shyly, "thank you. My dad used to say your husband gave him his first job. He said Mr. Turner was the kindest man he'd ever met." I smiled softly. "He was. And I think he'd be proud of what we've built." As the girl walked away, the sun dipped behind the hills, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I could almost feel him there beside me. Watching. At peace. And in that quiet golden light, I realized something beautiful. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the steady hand that closes a safe, and opens a legacy. If this story moved you, if you believe that truth always finds its way, no matter how deeply buried, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Ever Her Stories. Every story here is a reminder, behind every quiet woman's grief, there's strength the world never saw coming.